Indian large IT company which is figuring in that list. Most of it is not coming from India, even though it is published in India. So that clearly is a gap. I think we need to definitely invest more in research, because these technologies are going to be India specific and we are going to be reaping the benefits as well. So that's one thing I see as an action point for the sector, for the government, for people like us to build the infrastructure. In the infrastructure context, there's another point, which is about the computing piece, right? The cloud computing. Today, if you see most of the startups in India, when they're born in the cloud. Even before the business solution problem is identified, they're saying AWS is going to be this, and that's the infrastructure, cloud, and all of that. It's become very normal to do that. But it's time to ask the question that, do we have an alternate? Can we build? The government, of course, has said yes, and they've already established a concept or into reality. It's called Hyderabad. It's AI research, analytics, and knowledge assimilation platform. It's nothing but the cloud computing system purely for India. Why do we need something on our own? Because this is a question of infrastructure, you pay it and you get it. Yes, it's right. But there are a couple of items. If you look at the trend today, data localization or who owns the data becoming a big issue in the entire scenario. And for AI, data is the crux. So from a governance point of view, every country wants to safeguard the data. So therefore, you can't have something, infrastructure which is outside your country. But more importantly, this infrastructure is also not available elsewhere for ready-made. It's not like supercomputers which we can just hire for computing power. We need systems, we need computing power, which, for example, would have to do parallel computations for linear algebraic equations. So these are not something which is readily available. So if everybody is building, why can't we build on our own? So that's the thought process. So this is an important element, because this is going to yield research. See, imagine a researcher trying to model a large volume of data, and if you don't have the computing power backup given to him or her, you're not going to get high quality research coming out of it. So that's another area which I think as a country we have to make progress. Government has taken the first step. I'm sure the leaders in the private sector would step in very soon in this as well. But the larger question is, how are we going to see this from Indian perspective? Are we still going to say that we are the talent supplier to the rest of the world? Which means a corporation outside India, a startup in US, will utilize Indian talent, will probably invest in Bangalore, but create production services for their own market. So this is a traditional story of our IT BPM sector for a large guy. Even e-commerce, when it came, we were actually doing a lot of work outside the country than for India. But today, do we look at it as a continuum of that strategy, or can we create something for Indian consumption, Indian markets, Indian problems, Indian solutions? I think this question, if that is addressed as a country, we will see different results in AI.
Amazing insights, Mani. Quite a few pointers I would like to touch upon, right? In terms of global competitiveness, though India has a large talent pool of AI, but we are still, in terms of research paper and others, we are kind of lagging behind the top countries like US and China, and we need to take strides to change that scenario, and that's a challenge as well as an opportunity for the ecosystem. Is a very nice viewpoint to look at. And in terms of whether India is going to be just the talent supplier or grab this opportunity of being the AI enabler for the world and use AI as a tool for empowerment and enablement within India, using its own, addressing its own unique problems, is again a lot of opportunities, as you were sharing. Though the startup market is new, but these areas could be looked upon by startups as a problem statement to look at and address them and become a leveler, create level playing field in a very unique way, and kind of create an impact in the whole story of how AI can change the scenario for that. So, but having this context, right? So one is capability, infrastructure that is required, and it's good to know that India as a country is starting to contribute in terms of setting up infrastructure, and of course there is a lot to be done by the private players, large corporates, and all of that, which are just getting started. So the entire AI story, though it's been there for 20 years before, but it's kind of open for everybody in the last few years, right? Because it's become open source, and some of the barriers to enter into AI has kind of come down for people to easily explore AI as an opportunity to address a challenge and create a business, startup idea, or create some kind of a social impact, as you are saying. So some of the areas that you were sharing in terms of social impact and all those were very interesting. Could you go ahead and share a little more insights into using AI for Bharat? What are the areas that individuals, startups, and corporations should look at, and what depth they should go in terms of solutioning it and kind of address this opportunity of AI that's to be grabbed upon?
Absolutely. I think one of the things which you should definitely, all of us should take heart, is a saying which we are all familiar with. It's called "Small is Beautiful." It's a book written by Schumacher. It's written in a different context 50 years back, but the essence is still the same. He was arguing about small corporates versus large corporations and big governments, etc. But if you look at AI opportunities in India and AI in general, today if you look at the solution providers or the startups or any of the players in the AI economy, they're all starting. And by design, when you look at the AI word, you hear words like orchestrations, like data orchestration, and all of that is. Why are we saying this? Essentially, the machine intelligence is getting built with a large number of small components. So if you solve, for example, a data visualization problem, or let's say the data annotation or labeling problem with your own technology tool solution, it goes and fits with the larger solution which somebody else is building. So it's a chain of network you can imagine. It's not a unique product or a solution like which used to be the earlier market, the primary winner and the largest market share and so on and so forth. Here you have a number of units emerging. That is the largest scenario. So in this scenario, small beautiful means that you take one problem and solve it using AI, and the scalability is not your concern. And you don't have to really make money by becoming a large corporation. I'll give an example in Indian context. There is an organization, which is a non-profit foundation, which has now set up an institute for social impact. Now, they do research on agriculture, more importantly, more specifically in cotton. So they come up with an app which can help the farmer do the pest detection accurately and recommend the pesticide use and the proactive measures. Now, this was not possible in the early days because the distance between the data, the field, and the programmers and the researchers is pretty large. Now, AI has helped us to bridge this gap by getting into the mobile phone which is being carried by the farmer. So all he needs to do is to take a picture, and then you have a backend algorithm which runs the model, compares it with the otherwise available libraries, produces the timely epidemic, because the time between the detection and, let's say, spraying of pesticide is not months. He needs maybe a couple of hours or days. So AI has made this possible. And why is this important? Because if you look at cotton, 40-50% of our pesticide consumption goes into cotton, right? And if you do this variety, cotton might be fairly available in Egypt and so on and so forth. So if you solve one problem in one geography, it's going to be replicable and applicable much more faster without you becoming a larger corporation and ending the distribution model, etc. So that's just an example where the new talent can grow. And in Indian context, there's a defense, which is normally not something considered as a segment. Like, at least whenever I read the NASCOM reports, we look at all the segments, I don't see defense as a large segment. But that's opening up. And as usual, government has gone ahead and established the Center for AI and Robotics as long as 1986. They were doing a lot of good work in the what we call as drones, unmanned vehicles, and they are using AI for signal detection and all of these things. Right? But the interesting thing from the industry point of view is now these are getting opened up for private sector, because we all know the talent is going to come from the young generation and the private sector. And government is opening up, and there are a lot of opportunities for young entrepreneurs to make good this opportunity. And there are already companies which are in the defense contracts, which maybe even 20 years back is unthinkable in Indian context. So that's another area which is opening up. And like I mentioned earlier, in Indian context, the social sector always stands out. There is a startup in IIT Madras, A for Bharat. What they have done, like today, after the corona thing, all of us are in this mode. We are conversing in the virtual platform. And they have now thought about inclusion in this space. So what about those colleagues, those of us who don't have hearing abilities as good as we are? Hearing impairment, right? So it's going to be a little challenging for us because either the technology is already, you have internet, bandwidth and all of these issues, but then you also have the traditional barrier of communication. So what this solution is doing is actually translating the Indian Sign Language into a transcription model. So I can still communicate in the ISL, Indian Sign Language I am comfortable in talking, but you on the other hand can read my transcript or even listen to the voice without any deviation. And imagine this becoming, let's say, a part of Microsoft Teams and things like that. So the spread is already taken place. This is what I was saying. You can choose a problem well defined, but the moment you solve it, it's applicable worldwide. And that's why I said small is beautiful. So starting is always good. So I hope many more ideas and good things will come out of the private sector.
That's very interesting to know, Mani. Given so typically when these such technologies are looked upon, we look at corporations like manufacturing. What can we do for manufacturing? What is the solutions that could be done at a large-scale enterprise level? That's the kind of usual thought process. So your insights into how it could impact an individual agricultural farmer would be able to plan his who's starved of insights, right? In terms of how he manages his own facilities is a very raw approach. Rather, he is now given data-driven insights to look at how he can plan his pesticide management or the investments that he needs to do to buy pesticides, or rather even entirely avoid that cost of pesticides. So these unique use cases that you had shared looks like can make a huge impact in terms of the common man of Bharat, and of course this is all these areas in terms of the social good and that you are sharing also is very intriguing, because the whole site of AI, when we look at for the entire globe, right? When we talk about AI, the first thing that comes into mind is large corporations like Google, Microsoft, who play in a very different level playing field, and the problem statement that they address are at a very different aspect. But for India to start, as you rightly said, we need to start looking at unique use cases like that and leverage those opportunities and create. We can create more opportunities in terms of impactful use cases with common man like agriculture, in terms of managing their storage or distribution, or how matchmaking of marketplaces can be done, and all those aspects looks very promising. And also there are some good ideas. Some of the startups or any young aspiring person who's participating in today's call can look at and take it up. So for this context to be a true story, right? What do you think are, though the barriers of the industry in terms of AI used to be 15 years back, AI used to be in the R&D divisions of large corporations, right? And today, now with all open source technologies and all of that coming out for everybody to access, with so much information available, a lot of people have access to research papers, a lot of people have access to see how AI is applied in different areas of the world and how they are using it for problem solving. So there is a lot of inspiration, and also there is some references that India as a country also could look at. As you rightly said, there are already some countries that are leading in AI. China is there. China has in fact gone to a stage where it's gathered so much data, public data, and for its AI monitoring that it does, and wants to sell the data as a digital asset. So what do you think are the challenges that the community of that who want aspiring community of AI should look at in terms of challenges that it has with data, and how to create the AI story, right? The data part always need to be filtered. We all call data is the oil, right? But how much fuel it could give, how much fuel we have, how much accessibility we have, and what are the challenges you think the startups, individuals, and corporations need to look at in terms of data as a challenge, or how they make the AI story happen with the data aspect?
Yes, like you rightly said, data is obviously the foundation of the AI story, right? It's the foundation on which the entire edifice is getting built. And if you look at India's story in general in the past, like for example, when we first embarked on the digitization journey, so there's a huge inconsistency in terms of legacy data, the way papers are used, the storage, and it was a lot of challenge for the industry to actually get into a digital version of something which can be then worked upon, right? But fortunately for the AI part, it's not that difficult. What I mean today, if you look at data as an enabler or constraint, this is the same situation for any AI ML problem. If you look at any of the machine intelligence solution which people are trying, whether it is large corporation or a small startup, right? The key is how do we use the data to enrich the model? So no longer the premium is on the code part. I mean, that's why we have so much of low code, no code models and so on and so forth. In the earlier era, if you look at a large ERP provider, the value of the software was in the algorithm and the knowledge which went in making that software, the code, right? Today, in the ML world, the code is not that much of value if separated from the data and the reality. So it is about how much value you can create in the model by the code using the data. So data has become an integral part of the story. So when you look at it that framework, depending on the problem you are addressing, you can look at very viable options for data. I'll give you two examples in Indian context again. Look at payments, right? Digital payments. We all know that India is leading the world, and last year, fantastic results. We are leading the US by a factor of almost 20. We are at 25 billion transactions for last year, and US at 1 billion. Now, I can't see any parameter like that when we compare to US as far as India is concerned. So that's a good sign. And we have beaten China, we've beaten almost every other country goes into this area. Now, what does it mean from a data perspective? Now, this data is not last 50 years data. Yeah. This data is now, here and now, right? And fairly accurate, electronic, you have meta tags and all of this curated. Now, if we are able to orchestrate these data and come up with solutions, either on payment behavior or new solutions and all of that, so we are going to lead the India world in terms of the data. So which has never happened for us. So it's not that I don't have data. Another example, if I don't have the data, does it mean that I can't solve the problem? The answer is no. I'll give an example from a language, NLP. If you look at India, we've been also trying to create a lot of NLP models for our own languages. And of course, the West is pretty ahead in this ways. If you look at the European languages and English, you have wealth of data available, curated data sets and models, ASR models, predictions, series, and all of that, right? Now, of course, we are now starting to dream whether series can happen in Maithili and Manipuri and so on and so forth. But the important thing is 90% of the entire world languages are in the same way. It's only the few languages which has got the data which enable them to do the modeling, right? Even in India, except for maybe Hindi, Tamil, Bengali, not all the other languages are the same domain. So there's a need for creating curated data sets in the language which we are familiar with, which can be done only in India by India. I can't rely on Google to create my Manipuri data set. So if there is no data, we can create data. And of course, you will take advantage of technology like Zero Shot, which helps you to translate one language behavior, let's say Hindi, into Maithili without going through the entire cycle of ASR, data annotation, and model creation. So you will have to be very smart. I'm sure the newcomers will create these models, which will leverage the data where it exists, create data where it is required, but it will be on par with any AI problem. Data will be looked at in the same mode. India will not be at the constraint if we are starting late on this part.
Beautiful. So to understand, like data still is the key asset, and how the asset is created, there are better processes that are evolving, and India the technologists or ML/AI engineers need to be able to quickly adapt to this data process and understand and be part of to create a good story or intelligent agent in terms of how they create a modeling, whatever classification model or whatever model that they are creating in terms of transaction data or text data or conversation data. They should be able to create a sophisticated data asset and have a very good understanding of quality of data asset and how they are going to leverage that quality of asset against the model intelligence that they want to create. So this sophisticated insights that you shared in terms of what are the key aspects that the new evolution of AI that's coming in, how the AI engineers need to look at. I think quite a few youngsters are also part of this call, and I think that insight would have been really useful to them. The example that you shared in terms of digital payments is extremely useful. I think you've shared a unicorn idea in this call that all this data that's gathered is kind of a financial inclusion for the country, right? People who before never had a banking history, never had a credit score, now with this UPI payments and all this transaction now can become part of a different ecosystem of financial inclusion where they can be driven by different kind of AI modeling could be done against their purchase behavior, their incoming receivables and all of that to say how creditworthy they are to kind of probably avail a loan or get micro insurance or part of microfinance.
I just want to add another dimension to this data story. See, we talked about the availability of data, right?
Yeah.
But since we have a lot of technical audience today, I also want to revisit how data is viewed in our system, right? Typically, engineers have a lot of difficult time in looking at data as a raw material. But unfortunately, in the entire journey of AI, data preparation or data engineering or whatever name we call it, according to research, it contributes anywhere between 60 to 80% of the entire effort. Like we talked about data being the foundation, but there is an entire process of data collection, curation, and then tagging them, labeling data sets, and then ensuring that they are orchestrated into the systems. And then once the initial training data set is put it on the production machine, then continuing the operations, monitoring, it's a never-ending chain, right? Now, what happens in many of the organizations, even smaller, this is not viewed upon as critical as it should be. It is always looked upon as something which is not to be done by the core team, and then they look at outsourcing options, or they think that this is not something which is at the level of, let's say, writing a Python code or anything like that. But what people have to understand today, if you look at the maturity of the entire machine intelligence world, the emphasis is moved away from building models into actually making them into production, which means the terms like MLOps is gaining a lot of traffic today. What is MLOps? See, what is MLOps? It sounds like a nice jargon to me. We had DevOps earlier and now MLOps. It's very good. But if you look at it closely, every ML model is nothing but a set of code. So it's no different from the codes which we heard written in the past in terms of structure. But like I said before, the value of the code is derived from the data which is getting into this and the accuracy which yields the machine. Which means the processing the data is an integral part of your success journey. And whether you are an entrepreneur or a professional, you need to be very, very careful of this. And when you say MLOps, it's actually about orchestrating the data. So today we call this as data fabric. Data fabric is nothing but ensuring that your curated data is available for the consumers in the way they want, the time they want. Which means what is not said is all the process which I lined out earlier in terms of collection, curation, labeling, and ensuring that it is meeting the requirement of the data scientist. Now this itself is becoming a science. For example, I come across AML solutions to automate some of these processes. This is like a loop in the loop, right? But this is the other dimension of data, which has got a direct link with the jobs and opportunities which is going to create for it.
Absolutely. So, absolutely. So there is a lot of transactional or structured data, and with AI modeling done for unstructured data, there is a lot more complexities, and how it's curated becomes very important. And even to data, as you shared, is the mode to an there's data modes that the companies kind of have, and everybody should to create an intelligent opportunity. I think data modes will still be a key aspect, and how the approach to taken into processing of this unstructured data in terms of data aggregation, data curation, data validation, and annotation and labeling for supervised learning, or in fact, like as you shared, AI for AI, unsupervised models to kind of support the supervised learning. All this is kind of amazing to see, and these techniques and technologies are ever evolving, and the young talent needs to look an opportunity to look at these areas where they can look at. So there are so many areas and streams in terms of technical aspects that individuals, engineers, and companies can look at specializing and kind of grab that opportunity to contribute in the AI story. Let it be taken full-fledged idea and take it as an entire solution story, or let it be a part of contributing the engineering story of it, or the data story of it, or the kind of AI building story of it. That's amazing to kind of look at how data is actually becoming an enabler in the process of AI. So see, these many aspects, there is going to be so much technology and engineering that needs to be done, right? Like, so one of the important aspects that you shared earlier in the discussion as well, that India has a lot of talent with 1.3 billion people and so many millions of engineers around, and we being a major $150 billion plus IT enabled and IT enabled services country. That is again in terms of opportunity, in terms of providing services to larger corporations globally as well, and also kind of creating unique solutions in this. So what are the opportunities and enablement that Bharat needs to do to make a big pie and chunk of this for India and contribute to this effectively?
I think, see, now getting into the most important and the interesting aspect for many people about how AI is going to impact the job scenario, right? Whether it's going to create or distract or additional. The way I look at it, I think the answer remains in how India wants to look at the opportunity. See, for example, take the IT sector itself.
Yeah.
If you look at the last 20 years, the first 10 years of this decade, or this century, this 2001 to 2010, look at that period. The revenue growth of the entire sector was obviously pretty good, very steep, and therefore even the headcount in terms of people required also went up dramatically. So you saw a lot of traditional non-IT people entering the IT sector. That I remember those days where we used to recruit people even without a computer science degree, which was not even imaginable a few years back, because the demand was driving the people and the headcount was contributing to the revenue, so the industry went along with that. But if you look at the next 10 years, this is 2010 to till now, 2020, last 10 years if you see, of course the revenue have gone pretty high, from 80 billion or so, now we've touched close to 180, 190, and we're going to cross 200 billion as an industry. But if you look at the people growth, right, what was roughly about 2 million, now it's become 4.5 million, or just about double, or 2 million people is what we've been able to observe as an industry. So people would have observed the deviation between the growth of jobs and the growth of revenue of the sector, which is a good thing in a different context because of your value addition and so on and so forth. But India being a large populous country where the aspiring young are looking for jobs, then it's not such a good story, right? But it is not such a good story only when you limit yourself, either the industry or an individual, to what is visible right in front of us. So if I don't get an IT job in a large company, then I consider myself as a failure. If that is the kind of attitude we are going to propagate among our team, that's not really going to help even in this case, because the automation and AI they are going to reduce the human effort, but it is not all bad story in that sense. The key is going to be what kind of jobs are going to be available. And if you are worried about jobs going down or disappearing, that's certainly not going to happen. If you are close to 5 million people today getting employed in the IT BPM sector, in the next 10 years, you can easily add that many. So you can easily go to 10 million people, right? The challenge is not that. The challenge I think all of us are facing today, and also just with the geography, is what kind of jobs are going to get generated and how do I get it, right? So one thing is very clear, the talent diversity is now coming into the show. So we don't have to really worry about the large cities or assimilation of people into the large cities and the attendant problems in terms of their attrition, housing, and so on and so forth. Now, with the democratization of skills, anyone can learn anything, and there are enough hungry souls in the industry, in the country, who can grab these opportunities, and they will create the supply chain. So the supply chain is not a worry for the industry. Earlier, the onus was on the employer. See, if I were a corporate, I need to ensure that all my people have learned Y software package or X language because I'm answerable to my customers. But in the last few years, you've seen the learning onus has gone back to the people. So it is true even for a small organization like us. When we say that the responsibility of learning is shifted to the individual, the employer can be an enabler, but if you don't learn, you are not going to be in the next project. And if you are not going to learn the new technologies, then you are not going to even find a job in the job market. Even though you might be 5 years, 10 years, 15 years experience and you are a very good professional. So it's not about the remark on your capability of the past, it's about the future. And anyone who's going to be resilient and show the flexibility and adaptability is going to be. Just to give an example, in our own evolution, 10 years back when we first heard of ERP systems, and that needs to be done, executed from villages in Tamil Nadu and Karnataka, there were a lot of questions and apprehension, saying that would people be able to grasp these subjects? Will they be able to converse in English? Will they be able to have an uninterrupted work environment and so on and so forth? Our model has clearly shown the talent which is there, irrespective of their geography, can do all of this. So today we have a set of customers, both India and abroad, getting served from the people who joined us 10 years back from their villages. Now, all we need to do is to replicate this story in a larger environment, and that's already happening. I don't see any individual effort in this. It's happening largely due to your work from home advantage. But more importantly, if people realize that the opportunities are not going to come only in terms of programming skills. We talked about data, right? If 50-60% of your effort is going to be on the data for the AML world, then how are we equipping ourselves? What kind of technologies we need to be familiar? What should I do? What the skills which I can understand? And where are the opportunities? Which are the organizations which are working on these domains? So these are the simple questions which people can find answers to very easily in Google. And the more they equip themselves into these areas, then they will get assimilated into the larger growth. It may not be an IT BPM job. I think that distinction is what is critical. These definitions are created by us for our own convenience after these processes evolved. The world has moved on. In fact, there's a debate about the role of IT and BPM and the boundary between right now. And today I see even the technology world joining that domain. So you have a large variety of conglomerate people in the same domain. So the distinction is not going to be very clear, but that doesn't mean that the opportunities are going away. As long as we're able to pick the new skills, follow the trends, and India can only create more jobs, not less jobs.
Beautiful, beautiful. So there's a lot of insights that you were shared from your organization, where you're like putting across points of how to adopt and be changing with the ecosystem to adopt AI, and this there is a need of resilience and an agility that needs to be a part of culture of companies that evolve with the change. And as you also clearly shared, how to do it in terms of there is accessible information in terms of how the learning process or skill building is already been democratized with a lot of YouTube videos, Coursera kind of Udemy, Coursera, and those kind of ecosystem where online courses are available. And in fact, we have a lot of our own Indian companies that actually are also delivering large-scale online education programs in terms of how, in a structured way, also it could be built, and by the curiosity of individuals, also they'll be able to go learn these skill sets from the public domain of searching them in Google and in information driven and stuff, right? Like so, and your insight for particularly the traditional skill builders, traditional people who've been in the industry for 10 to 15 years who work, have the domain expertise which they need to look at as their expertise and just move, be agile and look at opportunities in these areas and bring about change in these aspects. So there is a lot of change in those aspects also. See, other areas I think you had shared was about, I would want to touch upon is in terms of AI, will it take away jobs? Right. That so as you rightly said, every industrial revolution has its own merits and demerits. But overall, as you are saying, AI is going to net value impact newer areas because of which there is going to be higher growth in different environments, higher economic impact. Again, which will again create its own kind of secondary jobs or tertiary jobs, which will so the ecosystem is kind of will be naturally resilient to this kind of absorption. That insight also is kind of very useful because automation, a lot of people scare the aspect of AI that automation is going to take away jobs and it's going to bring down people's lives. There is going to be some impact for sure, but like again, that it's a net old industries evolving. That change has to always happen, and with new industries coming up, it will create its own secondary and tertiary jobs that will still create an ecosystem for people who are displaced. That's kind of very important insight also for people to not take away the fear out of how AI adoption is going to be, because it's a moral factor, right? A lot of companies and people do fear that they going to take away people's jobs in terms of if they go and do certain aspects in AI. But as we also shared, some of the use cases that you shared, agriculture, the financial data, UPI, all this looks more of an enabler than something that needs to be feared about, right? Because these are areas that are unaddressed and are going to create beautiful impact in terms of how they are going to change lives and to give prospective new economic development for these streams of people who beforehand, before AI, they didn't have an option of these solutions without AI. So
just want to add one more point on the jobs.
Yeah. See,
one thing which we are also noticing in India and worldwide, now the definition of jobs are also changing, right? Most of the Western economies have already moved on to what they call as gig jobs and all of that. But even in India, the definition of job in terms of longevity, in terms of the benefits, in terms of the stability is also changing. I think what they call as taxi cab jobs. Now that is an important distinction because people have to be realistic in terms of the opportunities. So you might be skilled, you might be good, but if business conditions change, you might have to change the nature of your job. It is not a statement against your capability, but it is your willingness to adapt to the new environment, because end of the day there will be an economic value for that as well. Yeah. So the nature of jobs is something which we need to keep in mind. So we cannot demand what it was in the past. The second thing is, if you were to look at a simple way to how to adapt to this system, we just have to go back to academics. I don't know how many of the newcomers will have, but I'm not sure whether the school system still have those questions. There used to be a question or type of questions called ESC, explain with reference to context. Now today that is what is important. So you might know R or the Python code or how to write something in TensorFlow. But if you are able to also understand the context of domain in which it is getting used, I think that's where the winners will be found. Because nobody is going to value us only for the code we have. It is the context which is going to be important.
Absolutely, absolutely. Absolutely, Manivannan. So it was a nice conversing with you. There's a lot of takeaways, I believe, for all the participants to think about artificial intelligence for India beyond boundaries in terms of a kind of possible vision that everybody can aspire for, and the areas that they can use AI for, and how they can leverage the practices of handling data and creating modes with that and creating intelligence out of AI, and finally, how leverage the talent pool of India, right, which is the demographical advantage that we have to impact as in terms of the global market, as well as create solutions for Indian context. So it was absolutely an amazing conversation to share insights and converse with you, Manivannan, on this. Hopefully we can open the floor for Q&A along with Burhan.
Thank you, Sriram, and a very engaging conversation. Thanks for that. And we have one question from Tanigavel Jayaprakash. He's asked, where will AI be in 5 to 10 years? So that's a question.
Sriram, you want to take it?
Yeah, so in terms of there's a technology context and in terms of adoption context, right? Like in terms of adoption context, there is going to be no industry that will not be adopting AI. That's end of this decade. Every industry would have some significant contribution to their business impact adopting AI, right? Like, so there's one statistics that McKinsey shared end of 2020, which is like only 5% of large corporations have adopted AI, and there's so much to do in the AI space in that way. And in terms of AI per se, it's evolving. Supervised learning, unsupervised learning, architectures, technology, the hardware around it, the computational infrastructure needs, all of that is still in evolution. And in the context of India, we need to set up all of that to also make the story a bigger story for us. So that is kind of an aspiration that all of us are sharing. And but end of this decade, there's going to be a significant impact of AI and adoption in every industry in India as well, because there is already a wave of Industry 4 and all of that happening in a magnificent way.
Great. And I think we have got a few more questions, like how is AI beneficial in renewable energy sector?
Sorry, I didn't get...
So how AI is beneficial in renewable energy sector?
Oh, renewable energy.
Yeah.
See, I don't have a direct exposure to that sector, but whatever we observe from our environment, clearly wherever there are going to be sensors, and sensors which are going to generate data, then you would need the machine intelligence models to build to either prevent energy wastages or to create additional capacities. So solar is another example where you can already see people integrating their AI models for monitoring. So it is not like Sriram said, it's not going to be really sector-led opportunities. In fact, there's a famous saying by one of the authors that he says, I can predict the business model for the next 10,000 startups. What is it? Take X, add AI. That X can be anything. X can be a banking process, X can be a solar sector, it can be a textile unit, doesn't matter. So that's how the AI is going to be. It's going to be additive in nature. So it's a question of who's going to get there faster and adapt. And even the previous question, where will AI be in 5 years? AI is going to be there. It's not going to go anywhere. The question is, where will we be in 5 years? How far can we run? So, I don't have a specific example on the renewable energy sector, but this is what we found with our interaction with the solar team.
Yeah, so just to add to the use cases on renewable energy sector in terms of preventive maintenance, wherever sensors are, right? Like, so it will be computer vision aided monitoring of renewable assets, whether they are really capturing the solar panel is really capturing well, whether the wind turbines are basically revolving correctly, are there any damages in the wind turbines. All these use cases are kind of becoming, industries are exploring and experimenting and trying to make it a part of mainstream workflow in terms of doing preventive maintenance. So asset management is one of the key, has been a key area that industry has already started adopting the renewable energy sector.
Good perspectives from both. Thanks for that. And we have another question from Sanat Kumar Ravi. How does AI and ML impact the audit and finance and accounting functions?
Today is a wrong day. I think I asking me questions which I'm not even familiar. I'm not a FND guy, but clearly you can see from the sector perspective. The one sector which is adopted AI today and the leader is the FND. Is the BFSI segment, traditionally what we call as BFSI segment. And if you look at in that, the operations and the all these roles are already getting automated, and finance anyway generates tremendous amount of data, and so it's a good playing field for the AML solutions. But what it's going to impact in terms of the jobs or the solutions, I think that is interesting space. Because typically, if you look at the financial sector, right, you have annual reports and compliance reports and all of that, which are like annual and semi-annual and so on and so forth. Whereas the world has moved on to real time, and even the fraud detection and so on and so forth, everything is moving to real time. So one of the big impact is going to be on the auditing and the F&A functions, where to move the needle of the time limit. So there, I think AI is going to have a huge impact. There are already models available, and even we have launched a service which is combining the bots and the human element to do a time-bound bookkeeping service. There are tremendous opportunities which are happening in the F&A. And again, when I look at the people with finance domain experience or chartered accountants or anybody with the knowledge of finance, now unless they marry this with the AI world, it's going to be very difficult for us to sustain in the future, because everyone is going to ask you the same question, that how much of, they're not going to test you on the balance sheet fundamentals. That is over. Now they're going to ask you about the adaptability to the AI world. So yes, it is one of the leading, part of the leading sectors today. It may not remain as the future, because like I said before, the scope of AI is enlarging. In fact, in my own view, I think AI sectors will be much larger and bigger than our traditional IT BPM sector. But it's going to take some time. So as long as this trend continues, which is your BFSI, telecom and retail, which is close to 50-60% of the entire industry, then naturally they are the leaders.
Yeah, and I see there are multiple questions that are coming up. Maybe the answers are interesting. There are more questions here. So I think in parallel, Sriram, if you can also look at the Q&A box, and if you want to pick up something, that'd be good enough. And meanwhile, let me have a question from Ashid Sriram. He's asking, how would quantum computing affect AI and present computer generation, also on cryptography and the security of the systems? So, you want to repeat that?
See, so in terms of large data volumes of AI being trained upon extremely large volumes of data, quantum computing system might come in effect. But of course, it's still mostly in R&D for large-scale companies, and so whether AI with quantum computing is going to become mainstream eventually, but it might take a long time from now. So that is kind of my answer, viewpoint around that. Mani, you would like to add something around that?
No, that's pretty much the same view I have.
Yeah. So is AI overhyped? Is AI saturated, or is it going to evolve more? So, like, to answer to that question, right? Like, I think earlier in the conversation, also I had shared with that context. AI has crossed the Gartner's hype cycle curve, right? The hype was there, is there, but initially it was just considered hype. Now it's considered serious. The buzz is not just a hype. It's an industry effort. It's worth the hype. But how much? But see, this question has multiple layers to it, right? So. In terms of, let me just take in terms of technology aspect, right? Applications or mobile applications or back-end ERP systems or supply chain systems or CRS systems, are they going to go away and AI is going to take over the entire realm of technology? No. AI has its own space and it's additive to all the use cases that we are looking at, where data is captured and are going to complement all the processes or create new business models. So in that way, the hype is there because it's looking at new possibilities. It's not trying to replace the other possibilities or other options that are available. So in that way, when few people consider it's hype, they kind of might overlook this aspect of why it's hype. The hype is because there is an opportunity of it to be so much additive in so many spaces, and that is surely there. And it's going to evolve more. Of course, it's just getting started, and in terms of technology, in terms of how AI is built, how AI is going to be adopted, all of us are just surely getting started, and there's so much to evolve, and I think all of us needs to contribute to that.
And that is maybe we are a little overshooting the time. So maybe one last question from Arun Kumar is that expansion or growth in healthcare sector. Any inputs, please? Did you lose me or you heard it?
I would like to pick up the one on the conversational AI, and if that is all right.
Sure.
So someone is asking, what is the future of conversational AI? Right. So, see, even the previous question which Sriram was answering, the hype is there only if you read media reports. If you don't read the news media, then I think you will understand that we have not even scratched the surface, as they say. It is just the beginning. It is a beautiful coming together of multiple domains and technologies like never before. And languages, for example, has been not considered at the same level as banking in the past. AI is unifying all of that. And someone talked about the conversational AI. Again, we are now going to redefine this word conversational AI in the times to come. Today, probably what it means is a Siri or any of the speaking device. But the core of machine learning is going to be the communication between human beings and the machines, right? So you can call it any name. And it is nowhere near maturity. It is not even sufficing the purpose. You know, anybody who's used the Google Translate would know what I mean. And there's a huge scope. Like I said, how do you communicate to 500 million people who are not even in the cities and their context? The languages, the machines have to understand their context to be able to respond. Whether it's banking, whether it's conventional work, but if you don't understand the context of the people who are not similar to the data set which you have, then you're going to be failing miserably. So there's a huge work to be done in the conversational AI. In fact, as long as machines and humans exist, this conversation is going to keep evolving. So it is no longer near hype or into the saturation domain.
So maybe we'll have another option of maybe typing in the answers for the rest of the questions, so that that will ensure we'll have signed up at 4-5. It's already okay. I think we had a very entertaining and good session, and especially the participants were more engaging. And I think rest of the participants who have questions are yet to be answered, you can always write to us. You can write to me. I'm from NASSCOM, and guhan@nasscom.in is my email ID. I'll put it in the chat box. And we're also happy to welcome more suggestions on what other future topics that you would like to have to formulate more other sessions like this. Yeah. And otherwise, it was a great session by Sriram and Mani, and it was great wider thoughts that was covered. I'm sure the diaries and notes are full for all the participants. Thanks for your time, and thanks for your insights that's been given and shared to the community. Thank you so much. And I wish everybody to stay safe and take care. And thank you everyone for joining.
Thanks, Rohan. Thanks for everyone for listening to us. Thank you.
Thanks, Rohan. Thanks, Dheeraj. Thanks, everybody. Nice having this conversation with you all.